on his very first day after he's named. And Dr. Jonathan Perlin is going to have a few words for us.
Well, good afternoon. And thank you very, very much for that kind introduction, Ms. Brown, Mr. Clark, and veterans. It is a very special day. Obviously, at a personal level, it's an important day for me, but what an important opportunity to mark the 30th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. As I came in the doorway with Ms. Brown a couple hours ago, we just happened past a conversation where one veteran in the Army turned to another veteran, Marine, looked over and said, "Semper Fi." Response back, you can guess, "Hooah." And in that one moment, it crystallized for me and all of my colleagues who work here in Dallas and throughout VA why we're here. We're here because of those men and women who have served and who earned the ability to recognize each other with those words, with that shorthand that describes that brotherhood and sisterhood of service in uniform, and of the sacrifices that they've made throughout their lives, and those who paid the ultimate price on behalf of all of us whose freedoms they defend. And so on this day, I want to say on behalf of our new Secretary, Secretary Nicholson, our Deputy Secretary Gordon Mansfield, both Vietnam veterans, thank you for your service and welcome you to this important, very special commemoration. It's also a pleasure to be here to say thank you to the men and women who provide care to our nation's veterans. This medical center has had some difficult days in the year past, but I'm here to tell you that this medical center is turning around 180 degrees. There have always been men and women who would do whatever it takes to provide the highest quality care for veterans. But we missed the mark over the last year, and in fact, through the leadership of Ms. Betty Brown, Dr. Sum Ping, Dan Heers, Frankie Manning, and others, they have turned this medical center 180 degrees. This medical center has more than doubled in the level of performance measures and is already above the national mean. And I know that when I get to come back and join you a year from now, we will be here celebrating the fact that this VA, will be in the highest echelon of veterans healthcare providers in the entire country. And we do this not... We do this not to meet a performance number, not to meet a goal, not to make us happy in Washington, because it's our mission, it's our privilege to serve veterans. Because of the turnaround, I also come bearing news from Secretary Nicholson. Yes, it is my first day officially as the Undersecretary for Health, but there is another first day as well. And in appreciation and in response to the leadership that has been demonstrated in an incredible turnaround at this medical center, I come to you bearing news that Ms. Betty Bolin-Brown is the new director of this Dallas VA Medical Center. Brown, please. You obviously have the people's vote. I say to you, keep up the good work. I say to the employees here at VA, you know what your responsibilities are. Let's live up to them. Let's be accountable. Let's be accountable to the American public. Let's be accountable to Congress. Let's be accountable to ourselves. But most importantly, let's be accountable to the veterans that we are so privileged to serve. And I thank you for what, to the employees of this medical center, for what you do and for what you will do. And to the veterans who fought in Saigon, to the veterans who came before, and the veterans of conflict since, and all the veterans in this audience, on behalf of Secretary Nicholson, Deputy Secretary Mansfield, we say thank you on this very, very special day of commemoration. Thank you for letting me join you today. God bless. God bless America, God bless our troops, and God bless you.
We'll start our regular Veterans Forum today. As you all know, this is about our 22nd or 23rd Veterans Forum in about 5.5 years, and they've been an extraordinary privilege and pleasure. Actually, this will probably be the last one that I will oversee. I will be retiring in September. We don't have any more Veterans Forums planned, but this is a good one to commemorate the final American involvement in Vietnam and the 30th year anniversary, which is tomorrow. And that's what this program is about. We have 3 extraordinary people that were involved with that on April 29th, April 30th, 1975. They're members of our community here. We're delighted to have them, and I'll introduce them as we go along. On March 29th, in 1973, the last American combat troops left Vietnam, ending the direct involvement of the United States in the Vietnam War. Several thousand civilian Defense Department employees stayed on in Vietnam after the withdrawal of our troops. The last of these Americans were airlifted out of the country when there was the evacuation of Saigon on April 30th, 1975. A lot of people seem to think that, quote, America lost the war on this date 30 years ago. That's not true. The fact is the American troops always won on the battlefield against the enemy. Fact number 2 is that we had withdrawn 2 full years before, so there was not active United States military involvement in that country at the time that the communists broke the peace treaty and descended into South Vietnam and out of their strongholds and their safe havens that they had been attacking us for decades, obviously. So those are a couple of the facts that are very important to some of us, in fact, to understand that historically, and especially to the American people, and especially to the general public throughout the world. We will begin our program this morning, this afternoon. Stand if you're able. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance led by Ken Watterson, who is a Marine veteran of Vietnam and very active in the Marine Corps League. And then that will be followed by the singing of the Star Spangled Banner, the national anthem, led by Sharon Balthrop, the service chief of our medical media service. Ken Watterson.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave through banner yet wave for the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Please be seated. We have always have a lot of distinguished guests. We have them here today also, but a couple people. I don't know if we got her. Jug. I can't see you behind the column. Are you over there? Is Jug over there? Okay. Jug Burkett is the co-author of the book Stolen Valor, which is a special work of literary success for documenting some of the wannabes from the Vietnam War and some of the heroic stories of people from our generation of warriors. And Jug Burkett is over here to my right in the back of the room to sell copies of his book Stolen Valor. He donates 10% of whatever he takes from revenue from the book sales to the program of our combined federal campaign here, which is the government program for United Way for our employee contributions. It's always a pleasure to have Dick Agnew. Would you stand, Dick? Dick is president of North Texas, commander of the North Texas chapter of Legion of Valor, which is the top 2 decorations for gallantry and valor in the United States military: Medal of Honor, Navy Cross, Air Force Cross, Distinguished Service Cross. He has a Distinguished Service Cross from the Korean War. He leads our Fisher House Fundraising Advisory Committee, and he is very active with our community council. We're always delighted to have Dick here. We have hopefully 2 people from Senator Cornyn's office. We have Jerome Foss and Aaron Christian. Would you both please stand and face the audience? We're always delighted when people... We're always very delighted when people from the congressional offices and senatorial offices support us by coming. We, of course, handle the issues that come directly to them for patient care, questions, and so forth. We're always glad to have their support here and to understand more about us, understand and appreciate our veteran culture, and be available when we need help out there in the community or with the Congress or whatever the case may be. There's probably other people in the audience that are worthy of introduction, but I'm actually on convalescent leave and am not as normally plugged in as I typically have been for the other 22 or so Veterans Forums, and just came in from my home today to work this program. And then next Friday at 2 o'clock in here, we're going to have a program that is a commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the victory over Japan. So we've invited World War II veterans victory in Europe. Victory in Europe. A week from today, we have August 12th as the Victory in Japan program, but we've invited our World War II veterans to come in for that. Africa, Middle East, European campaign in that hemisphere, and come in, and employees are invited to come in and say hello to them and greet them and welcome them to our reception that day. I believe that we're ready to go on with the forum. Penny, is there anything else I should think of? Okay. We have 3 wonderful people here today. I've known 2 for a long time. One is a new person that I've just been acquainted with today. But we have 3 gentlemen, and I will introduce them one at a time. But we'll start with Tom Nguyen. Tom is was a Vietnamese Air Force lieutenant colonel, and he has a story to tell relative to the last few weeks and the last few hours of the final evacuation of Saigon on April 30th, 1975. He lives in our community. He had lived in Arizona for about 10 years. He'd been to flight training in the United States for his training for the Vietnamese Air Force, and he has 4 children and 10 grandchildren. He works for Northrop Corporation in this community, and he's well known to many of the people in our community. And we wanted to start with him today, and I'm going to go ahead and move back over here so I can face the 3 panelists and guide a few little questions, and it'll be just some presentations, because they know what they did a lot better than I've been trying to find out what they did just by asking them some questions. in the last couple of weeks. So if I could just move this right there, please. Tom, we'd like to start with you. Welcome. We're delighted to have you here. And I was very proud to see you with your hand over your heart, pledging allegiance to our flag and our Star-Spangled Banner as a citizen of our nation. You grew up in Hue, and then you went into the Vietnamese Air Force in 1962. You trained at Randolph, and also you came back in 1964. So you want to pick us up a little bit there and kind of give us just a few brief comments about your time in the flights that you did and the kind of missions that you performed, kind of through the main part of the war till the United States withdrew their active involvement in the war in 73. Just kind of those 9 years of involvement, kind of things that you did.
Thank you, Alan. First of all, I would like to thank America and our friend, Vietnam vet, fight for freedom for Vietnam along with us from 1960 to 1975. Myself, Thomas Nguyen, is an American name. When we came here in 1975, I joined to the Air Force in 1962, training in the Randolph Air Force Base. The first I got the win from Air Force in early 1964, and come back to Vietnam, training to the Skyraider attack airplane. Flew about like 100-hour mission for every month for the IAS Skyraider, and I flew 10 missions to the north in 1965. And then 1962-66, I came back to the United States for cross-train on the F-5 fighter, F-5A, and returned to Vietnam for the F-5. And later on, we trained the F-5E, another model of the F-5. And 1972, I became the squadron commander, and I left Vietnam in 1975 in the last day with one F-5 single seat with 2 pilots, land in Utah.
Well, before we get into the final hours of your involvement there, by late March of 1975, you were still flying missions. So begin to tell us what began to happen in late March and in early April in the country that laid the groundwork for the necessity for the evacuation of Saigon.
Yes, in 1975 in March, we have the F-5, 6 F-5 squadron, and we have 1 squadron in Da Nang for the air defense. We prevent the MiG from the north coming down, so we got 1 F-5 squadron in Da Nang. And my station in Bien Hoa Air Base. But by the late March 1975, we begin in my hometown is Hue, North Da Nang. So all my family in Hue is like stuck there with the communists. So they try to escape from Hue to Da Nang. I flew for F-5 from Bien Hoa to Da Nang, try to take my family out. I have permission to get one C-130, so can carry the whole family, 50 person in my family in, but the airplane cannot land in Da Nang because by the last minute, the airplane cannot land in because unsafe. Every time when we landing come in, as you know that the people jump in, overloaded, cannot take off. Example, we got one airline take off with the people on the bare wheel, So that's the reason why my family stuck there in March 1975. So I flew back to Bien Hoa with our family, just my mother and my brother and all by 50 members in my family stayed there. We still, even that situation, but we still have flew 3 missions a day, for each pilot for fight the communists with very little supply. We don't have enough supply, anything after the 1973 ceasefire agreement. So that's why it looked like Vietnamese armed force fight the communists with the high hand tie. So it's very difficult for us. But we fight in the last minute.
When Da Nang fell, you indicated you were on the last plane out of there. You want to talk about that a little bit, about coming out of Da Nang and back to Bien Hoa?
Yes, when in the 30th of March 1975, around 5 p.m., we received the phone call from the one official from the U.S. called that Da Nang going to have very rocket fire from the communists very soon. You guys have to evacuate the airplane from the Da Nang. So by that time my family is still there, so I had to take my family out to the Da Nang Air Base. It's still very difficult to get out. But during transportation, bring my family out to the gate, and the motor shell and rocket start to get in. So most of the airplane take off if the airplane is still on the operation. And I'm the last one, take off under the heavy motor shell and the rocket from the communists in Da Nang.
So you and your family came back to Bien Hoa, and then in the second week of April, you all had to move to Tan Son Nhut,
Right.
Air Force Base in Saigon.
Yes. Our Air Force Base in Bien Hoa, about like 15 miles northeast of Saigon, but under the heavy attack from the communists, so we had to move the F-5 back to Saigon in the second week of the April. We still operation from that second week, but during the same time, we know that we have a lot of evacuation from the U.S. official. But we still fighting. We don't know anything. Still fighting until the last minute.
Talk a little bit about the conditions under which your family were allowed, your spouse and your children were allowed to leave Tan Son Nhut. You mentioned the 24th, 25th of April, an American General Young, American Air Force advisor. He came to you pilots, and what did he offer you all the opportunity?
Yes, on 24th of April in 1975, we still operation as normal under very heavy pressure from the communists. And General Young is U.S. Air Force advisor for the VNAP by that time. And Lieutenant Michel is my advisor. Come to my squad and say, go ahead and make a list for your spouse and your children so we can take them for ANA. That's why we know. So we made a list for them to take from the ANA and say what kind of luggage they got that can bring. They say, don't worry, take few with your hand carry. We will take care of that. So on 25th of the April, my wife and 4 children, the youngest one about 8 months old, and get out to the airplane and go to the C-141 and flew out. And by that time, I have lost contact with them. And I will still stay in Tan Son Nhut for combat mission. I still fly 2 or 3 missions a day. And until the last day is 29. Of course, you know, the 28, they have a flight of 4 A-37 attack on the Tan Son Nhut. And the 29th, very heavy rockets got in that Tan Son Nhut Air Base, and we got the green light from advisor say you guys can go. So when in 9:30 on 29, we run out the airplane, and whichever the airplane can have gas, so we jump in, and especially myself. I jump in one airplane with one of my deputy squadron, jump on my back. I had to throw my parachute down so he can sit on my back, and we flew out to the Utah.
And you indicated that they were still mortaring the airstrip upon your departure, and they were surrounding the airfield at Tan Son Nhut at about the time you all flew out.
Right. When we flew out there, the rockets still sent in, But luckily, we don't have any rocket hit on the runway, so we can take off. But during the taxiway, we still have a hole and everything. Even at my car is flat tire because the rocket explosion next to that.
And you indicated you had about 145 pilots total, I guess, in your squadron. Is that correct? Or your
Yes,
unit?
we got 5 squadrons in Tân Sơn Nhất, and each squadron have 25 pilots.
Okay.
And
So
yeah,
and 105 out of the 145 made it out.
yes, 105 make it out, but only about 40 make it out by airplane.
Okay.
We brought about 30 some. I'm not exactly the number to the Utapa.
Okay. And you all, then many that were left there were moved into what they call the re-education camps for several years.
Yes, sir. The rest of them, all the Vietnamese, South Vietnamese official and the military got on the camp, which is commonly called really nice re-education camp, but actually the prison camp. I have a couple of pilots have to stay there in the camp at least 10 years in that camp, and then after they get out, and we have a program by the U.S. Congress for the human delivery ordering, so they can come over here. In 2003, we had the reunion for all the F-5 pilots, so we can have a chance to count how many stay still here and how many passed away and how many in the prison. So we got around 120 pilots come over here with family. We got 2 still in Vietnam, and some of them already passed away because some sickness or something.
Well, we applaud your being your ally, obviously, in South Vietnam for the war and for the battles, and I personally applaud you as a fellow person who fought in that war for the fortitude you expressed, the loyalty you expressed to the cause, and for you to continue to fight till you left, because, as we well know, the communist movement was so fast and so furious and so all-encompassing that many of your fellow warriors, many of the fellow officers, deserted and left the troops alone, and they had to surrender. So I applaud what you did, and we're proud that people like you continue to serve till the end.
Thank you very much.
George Petrie on our left side of the panel here is retired Army Major. He was in Special Forces for probably the majority of your time in the military and had a lot of time on the ground during the time of the war. And by June 1974, 9 months before the evacuation, he was stationed in 3 Corps in the Saigon area, lived at Tan Son Nhut, and maybe Benoit, Tan Son Nhut, whatever. You were with the Joint Casualty,
Resolution Center.
Resolution Center. And so you stayed in the field, and you were involved with gathering intelligence and various and sundry other activities. And, you can tell the story about how everything began to happen in March and April, George, better than my kind of questioning you about it. As we proceeded along here, you can probably just go along and tell what happened and kind of phase it in with where Tom was on the 29th, 28th, and 29th, and so forth. So you begin about, how things began to change as the communists moved into South Vietnam, what you had to start doing.
In late March, as Alan said, I was assigned as a field officer for the Joint Casualty Resolution Center. We had 4 Special Forces officers working in each Corps area, gathering intelligence on missing in action, American missing in action, body not recovered, crash sites, etc. We had a small liaison team in Saigon. Our headquarters was in Thailand. Obviously, by late March, we couldn't wander around in the bushes anymore. And the other 3 captains who were in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 4th Corps had already been pulled out and sent back to Thailand. I was still working 3 Corps and I had just got to where I couldn't work in the field anymore, and I'd been pulled back into Saigon. At that time, General Smith, the defense attaché, came to my boss, an Air Force colonel, and asked him if he would place me and Captain Tony Woods. I was a captain at the time. Captain Tony Woods, a Marine captain who was our operations officer, on TDY, the Defense Attaché Office, to assist in evacuation planning for evacuation of the Saigon area. At that time, the peace treaty only allowed 50 military officers to be assigned in Vietnam. Now, JCRC, the unit I was assigned to, was an exception to that because we were humanitarians, and also the members of the four-party joint negotiating team, the military officers assigned to that, were an exception. So Tony and I were detailed at the Defense Attaché Office along with the Marine Major, Jim Saboteur, from the four-party, as well as a Special Forces sergeant who was the ops sergeant for JCRC, as well as also two Special Forces medics who were TDY from my unit from Thailand. And we became known as the Special Planning Group for the evacuation of Saigon. Initially, we were tasked to do a population survey of the Saigon area to determine how many Americans, not only Defense Attaché civilians or Defense Attaché DOD civilians, but also expatriates. There were a lot of Americans living in Saigon area, retirees as well as contractors, people who work for the big American contracting firms there. So we had to do a density study just to figure out where they were living, where they were, in the event an emergency evacuation became necessary. On or about the 1st of April, Da Nang had pretty much blown up. What Tom was describing, the chaos on the runways, the chaos in the streets, pretty much made General Smith and the embassy planners realize that the old American embassy evacuation plan for Saigon wasn't going to work anymore because all the landing zones that they had for downtown areas to get the embassy people out were on the ground, and that just wasn't going to work because the experiences they had in Da Nang were that the Vietnamese population would panic and just overrun the helicopters and overrun the airplanes. So it's obvious that that kind of situation wasn't going to work in Saigon. So then we were tasked to come up with an emergency evacuation plan for downtown Saigon. And our plan was at that time to utilize buses and Air America helicopters. We identified 13 buildings downtown that were leased by the United States government as quarters for the Americans, which we surveyed and determined that those buildings would take a helicopter, a Huey helicopter, the UH-1B for you veterans. You know what that is. The Air America choppers were UH-1Bs. So we immediately set work crews on those buildings and cleared them. We had to paint an H on them because the helicopter, unless it landed directly on the H, it would tear its rotors up and obstacles. So it was pretty precise flying. We then identified people that lived in those buildings, and we trained them to be landing zone controllers and equipped them to do that. And then, of course, we briefed them. We had to brief all the building occupants, and then we came up with a bus evacuation plan. We got volunteer drivers among the BAO and embassy population, people who worked for that. And the object was that if we had to have an emergency evacuation downtown, that the people would be evacuated out to Tan Son Nhut Air Base, where the Defense Attaché headquarters was, that the evacuation would take place at night with buses, with a code word going out over the radio, plus people would be called, and that the buses would operate at night, hopefully covertly, and get as many people out from downtown. We had actually 26 buildings downtown where people lived and could gather, and to bring as many people out to Tan Son Nhut Air Base as possible during the night, and then the next day during daylight hours actually mop up those that were remaining using the Air America helicopters off the rooftops. As I'll explain in a minute, that wasn't quite what happened. Then we were further tasked when we started to evacuate. General Smith decided on his own to start evacuating key employees, American employees first, and then as it started to grow, key Vietnamese employees and their families from the Defense Attaché Office. We initially set up an evacuation processing point at our movie theater, but after a few days, we started evacuating too many, and we were evacuating these people through fixed-wing airplanes, C-130s, to Guam and the Philippines, where the military there set up a processing point. But the movie theater soon became a little bit too crowded. So General Smith tasked us to use the facilities that had been before the PX, the swimming pool. They had a gymnasium, they had a bowling alley, they had a fire department, kind of a small complex in the back part of the Defense Attaché compound. For those of you who were assigned over there during the war, the Defense Attaché compound at Tonsanute was known as the Pentagon East during the war. It's where General Westmore and where MACV headquarters was. So you know it was a pretty good-sized complex, and they had all the amenities, which you and I didn't have out in the bush. So it was a pretty good-sized compound. So immediately we designed a processing center. We turned the gymnasium into a processing center where they would get their paperwork done. We turned the bowling alley into a nursery. We turned the fire station into a dispensary. They had a big two-story building, which was later named Dodge City, which we turned into a overnight holding area if necessary. We stocked it with sea rations and other canned foodstuffs. We drained the swimming pool and used it as a holding area. It was a pretty good-sized swimming pool. We had customs people flown in from the Philippines. We used a handball court as a jail because we did have some deserters come out of woodwork. I had one guy come walking by me one day, really ragbag-looking guy, and I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "Well, I work for Sears and Roebuck." Hey, man, Sears and Roebuck ain't been here lately. We put him in handcuffs and marched him off to the handball court. Sent him to Guam in handcuffs. But the State Department then approved what they call laissez-faire passes, because by that time we had a lot of people in there. All the Defense Department, embassy, Americans were wanting their families, their employees out, their Vietnamese employees out, and of course each Vietnamese employee, which Tom can verify, it wasn't just a matter of taking his wife and children out. It was grandchildren or grandparents, grandchildren, nephews, nieces, aunts, uncles. So you're talking extended family here, 50 and 60 people at a whack. So by this time we were, by about the 20th of April, through that major processing center, we were processing 5,000 and 6,000 a day through there with an overnight population of about 2,000. And it was really beginning to get quite a heavy refugee traffic flow through there. Our security there was the Da Nang Embassy Marines, because of course Da Nang is shut down. We had a squad of Marines that had been the embassy security guards up there, so they were working for us out there. The last week, security became a major problem. We had to shut it down. We requested from General Carey, who was commander of the task force, to send us in a Marine rifle platoon, which they did, which saved our bacon because we couldn't have done it without them. So they put a blanket of security on the place, and everything went smooth as silk. We were evacuating using C-141s from 13th Air Force, as well as C-130s from 13th Air Force, and shipping them most to Guam and some to the Philippines. General Smith, of course, had cut off all PX sales, liquor sales, and everything, so to more or less force the American retiree population out of there, because they were sitting back saying basically, well, there'll be an emergency evacuation one of these days, and they'll have to take us then. But he basically cut off everything from them, so that forced a lot of them out. It didn't force all of them out, but it forced a lot of them out. Eventually, between the 20th of April and the last day, through that processing center, we evacuated 80,000 people without any problems, mostly Vietnamese. Uh, we then were tasked to establish the defense attaché compound. General Carey's people came in, his liaison team came in, told us what they needed to set the compound up for an emergency evacuation if that became necessary. And of course, by that time, the North Vietnamese were tightening the noose around Saigon. There were something like 16 or 17 infantry divisions on the perimeter, infantry and armored divisions on the perimeter of Saigon with all the artillery and anti-aircraft units they needed. And I'm not talking way out on the perimeter. I'm talking about at the city limits. So we pretty well guessed that there was going to be an emergency evacuation. It was just a matter of when. We built, I think it was 5 landing zones. Well, we stripped the tennis courts down. We had a big softball field. We asphalted it. The PX parking lot and 2 other major parking lots. We stripped those down and made landing zones that were capable of taking CH-53s. That's the big Jolly Green Giant helicopters. We set up marshalling areas inside the DAO buildings and in the PX areas to be able to marshal aircraft loads. We trained our own people as stick leaders, in other words, people that could count the loads and bring the people out to the helicopters. We set up a system where we could count the people and control the manifest, when the emergency evacuation was going to have to take place. We had the refueling points set up for our own Air America helicopters. And so basically, come the 29th, when the emergency evacuation started, we were ready. On the last day, they had a meeting on the 28th, the afternoon, late on the afternoon of the 28th. The NVA conducted an airstrike using captured F-5s out of, I think they came out of Cam Ranh Bay, didn't they?
No, the Phan Rang Bay.
Phan Rang, okay, yeah, it was Phan Rang. The North Vietnamese flew out of Phan Rang with a flight of F-5s and conducted an airstrike against Tan Son Nhut Air Base. Destroyed an American C-130 sitting on the ground. Fortunately, nobody got hurt. But they did do not a whole lot of damage, but it was kind of a signal, time's a wasting, boys. It's time for the Americans to go. That night, Ambassador Martin held a meeting about 10 or 11 o'clock that night down at the embassy. You have to understand that throughout all of this, Ambassador Martin was very, very reluctant to declare that there was going to be an evacuation. 2 days before the emergency evacuation, he got a signal from the ICCS, the International Control Commission, which was a bunch of peacekeepers that were over there that was supposed to keep the peace between the 4 parties that were in negotiation. We had a nickname for them. Instead of ICCS, International Control Group, I Can't Control, and you can guess what the S stood for. Was that the North Vietnamese might be able to arrange something where the Americans could keep a small diplomatic element there after, if the South Vietnamese would capitulate. And Martin jumped on that like a hot potato, I even got approached about being the headquarters commandant of the small group there for the 4-party team. And the only thing they were doing was blowing smoke. But Martin was grasping at anything to be able to stay. And as a result, he was wearing blinders. And at the meeting that night, my boss was a Marine full bull named Pat Howard that ran the Evacuation Command Center. And I couldn't go in the meeting. I had to sit outside in the waiting room and wait on him. But he, General Smith, some of the other smarter people in the room were trying to convince him to go ahead that night and declare the emergency evacuation so we could get the buses moving downtown, that there was absolutely no hope, that this was it. They had the town completely surrounded. That afternoon, 2 NVA battalions had captured the bridge that led across the river into downtown that captured all the commissary warehouses, the American commissary warehouses, and they were there. I mean, it wasn't a matter of they weren't going to do it. They were there. They were sitting right outside the runway at Tonsanute. You could see them across the fields. I mean, they had the place surrounded. No. Martin was adamant. He gave General Smith what literally amounted to a direct order. Tomorrow you will evacuate 100,000 key Vietnamese officials. Fixed wing. How many fixed wing assets? I want to shoot for 100,000. How many fixed wing assets can we get into Tonsanute tomorrow? And these guys are throwing up their hands, you know. So Colonel Howard, on the way back out to Tonsanute that night, I told him, I said, 5 o'clock tomorrow morning. That's when it's going to happen. I went back to our trailer that I was staying in the old general's quarters there. And my roommate was a Marine captain. I can't remember his name, but he was a demo guy that was attached to us. He was an old Mustang. And his job was to blow up pull a fuse on Pentagon East when we left. And I said, there ain't no use to go to bed. It was already about 3 o'clock in the morning. We might as well go out and sit on the stoop and have a cigarette and a beer, because we lived on beer anyway, because of the heat. You had to keep hydrating yourself all the time. And we took our flak jacket, our gear, and went out there and sat on the veranda of the trailer. And sure enough, right at 5 o'clock, the first rounds hit. 120 rockets, howitzer fire, mortar fire. I mean, they just rained down on us. That's when we had 2 of the young Marines from the Da Nang Embassy Guard got killed with a direct hit from a 122 rocket on their position. But they just shelled the fire out of us. And we just went on and we had to go over to where the refugees were and get them settled down. But by that time, when it was over then, about 10 o'clock that morning, before the actual emergency evacuation started, General Smith told Martin to go ahead and order the emergency evacuation. And it looked like an air circus out on the runway. I'm sure that you can attest to this. There were planes taking off the taxiways, planes going sideways down the runway, trying to get away. I mean, it was a zoo out on Tonsanute. The runways had been cratered. There was no way you're going to bring fixed-wing aircraft in. Yet Martin, rather than listen to this Army 2-star general, is telling him, do it. There's no way we're going to be able to use fixed-wing assets. We have no runway to bring them in on. He didn't believe him. He had to come out personally and take a look. And he still would not order the emergency evacuation. It literally took a direct order from Singpak and Kissinger to get him to order General Carey's folks in. But in the meantime, we had already started early that morning. As soon as it broke daylight, we started the downtown emergency evacuation with our buses and the Air America helicopters, which started out, but there was some screw-ups on that, fuel and everything, so the choppers would run off the rooftops, bringing them into Tonsanute till they had enough gas just to get out to the fleet. So they were making their last load, taking it directly out to the fleet, fueling up, and then coming back. And they ran till late that afternoon, and then finally that was over. The buses continued to run, except when Martin confiscated about half of them, left them parked in the embassy compound. And that pretty much was my participation. I got one last thing to say about it. The media focused most of the evacuation publicity on the embassy. And it was a complete rat screw down there. It was a mess. But the embassy was never supposed to be used as an evacuation point. It was one building out of the 13 or 14 that we had set up. And it was only to be used for embassy staff who were working at that time. We had gone down, Tony and I and Jim Sabater had gone down several days before the emergency evacuation and told the embassy security people what they should do, how to set up their roadblocks to channel the crowd away from the embassy gates so they wouldn't have had that chaos that they ended up eventually having there. They totally ignored us. We even offered to send our work crews down to set up and do the work for them, but they just totally ignored us. As a result, you saw what happened there that day. But out of Tonsanute, which the press never mentioned anything about it, we evacuated pretty close to, well, somewhere around 7,500 people that day, under fire a good part of the day, at least dropping all around us, not directly into the compound except for the first couple of hours that morning. And we didn't, with the exception of the judge in Mamayon who died by that errant round first thing that morning, we evacuated 7,500 plus people all day long in an emergency evacuation situation without a hitch. No problems, nothing. Thanks to the Marines and our prior planning with the Marines. So we had no problems. But yet the press made it look like that the evacuation was a complete abysmal, whatever you pronounce that, failure.
George, I know that you got out just a little bit after midnight on April 30th. I want to thank you for this.
Well, it was late that evening on April the 29th, somewhere
29th.
around that time.
Yeah.
I came out with the last group of Marines that came out.
George is a very highly decorated veteran of Vietnam, and one of the special times of service for him was that he was on the Santai raid in November of 1970. Those of you that keep up with our history know that we attempted to go into a POW camp, which ended up not having Americans in at the time they went. George was in that special forces group, special operations group that went in there. We want to thank you very much for this on the ground rendition of the history of those last few days, George. Thank you very much.
I got one more thing to say. One of our bus drivers that day was a 62-year-old USAID GS-18 who had a heart attack driving his bus when a Vietnamese soldier who was mad shot the engine out of it. Didn't shoot it out to where he couldn't drive it, but he had a major heart attack, continued to drive his bus until he got into Tonsanute. Just a little thought there.
General Carey, you are a retired Lieutenant General, United States Marine Corps, a resident of our community, and as a Brigadier General, you were in charge of the 9th Marine Amphibious Brigade that was in charge of this entire operation, and you can tie all this together from the strategic angle and how you put this operation together and your perspective from the ambassador and all the challenges there at the last minute and right up to the last Marines coming off the roof at the embassy. We'd like you to tie all this together with from your perspective. He has been interviewed on national television and obviously has a lot to say about what happened that day 30 years ago.
I'm just going to ask you, Alan, how much time do I have?
You have as much as you want, General Carey. It's always a little hard to direct these veterans forums, and you take all the time you need. If people need to go out back to work, they will, but our last one lasted for an hour and a half 2 weeks ago, and it just doesn't matter. You got a lot to say. We want to hear everything you have to say.
Well, first off, I'd like to say to Mr. Pham, I have a great deal of admiration for the Vietnamese military forces, particularly in the last days. We were watching it very closely, and particularly up there at Ben Hoa, where the 18th Division took on overwhelming odds and fought right down to almost the last man. So if you hear comments at times about the fighting ability of the South Vietnamese, they were very good soldiers. They developed into very good soldiers, and their air was very good. And it's too bad they just flat ran out of bombs. It's just too bad. And as for our friends on the ground in the Saigon area, one of which was George, working out of I believe you called it the Alamo, didn't you, George? You called it the Alamo, the last stand at the Alamo. They had things very, very well prepared. Unfortunately, a lot of political decisions and decisions by the ambassador at the 11th hour kind of messed things up. But as the commander of the 9th Marine Amphibious Brigade, I was in charge of about 5,000 Marines, 100 helicopters, 4 aircraft carriers, 40 ships. I wasn't in charge of the ships. That was the Navy, the Admiral. of the 7th Fleet, Admiral Steele, and 15 amphibious ships and 15 military sea transport ships, which were going to bring out the refugees, the evacuees. So it was quite a formidable force, and we started. There was a lot of things that happened putting my brigade together. We started out in classic style, Marine Corps style, with Marine amphibious units, 3 of them, and we found out that was too difficult to control, and eventually reorganized into a 9th Marine Amphibious Brigade at the 11th hour. We went back and forth to Saigon, and I might add, I went down there the first time on the 8th of April and went in with a couple of members of my staff, one of whom was Al Gray, who later became the commandant of the Marine Corps, for those of you that know him. And we had to go into Saigon to talk to the ambassador in civilian clothes because, as George pointed out, there was a limit on the number of military people, American military people, that were allowed in the country at the time. And they had a 4-power commission in there that consisted of Poles and Hungarians and a couple other nations, most of which were communist affiliated, that were overseeing all this. And then there was a 4-power committee also consisting of representatives of the American government, the South Vietnamese government, the North Vietnamese government, and the Viet Cong that were trying to sort things out. Well, you can imagine what was happening. As a commander of that MAB, I had commands starting from Washington on down that decided, it seemed like every 2 hours, to change the ops plans. So there was no rest for the weary aboard the ship planning this, and back and forth into Saigon trying to work things out. It was very, very opportune that we had the group in Saigon doing the planning. Believe me, they're basically responsible, those along with the courageous pilots that flew into the type of activity that they were going into the night that we did the evacuation. In case you don't know, you may have read some history on it. There was an imminent typhoon in the area. We had thunderstorms, lightning, and for those that are in aviation, you know the problems with that. The pilots had not been into the area. They were not familiar with it, many of them. Some of them had tours in Vietnam, but had not flown into the embassy nor into the DAO compound and didn't know where they were. And as it turned out, most of the flying was done at night. The easiest part, thanks to, again, the people that were in the DAO compound and George's people, the people that he was working with, the DAO went very smoothly, except for a couple of incidents. We had one incident where the Marine control team that was up on top of the DAO was driven off by machine gun fire, and they had to take the people that were firing at them under fire. We still don't know whether it was South Vietnamese disenchanted that wanted to go out, or whether it was North Vietnamese. But they took them under fire, fought them off, and continued on with their mission. But the DAO itself, again, when I received the word at noon on the 29th, and it took us about an hour and a half to cycle our airplanes, which was part of the delay in getting them into the field, and we were not intending at all to go into the embassy. Again, as George brought out, there was never any intention to evacuate from the embassy in any of the plans. The only thing that we did at the last minute, we were able finally to get permission to cut down a tamarind tree at 11 o'clock in the morning on the 29th, which was right in the middle of the embassy compound. And that's where all the CH-53s, the heavy helicopters, went in, where that tree was. So you can see that it was obvious. We did not plan, but we had contingency plans. Believe me, you always do in a case like that. So when I got the word at 12, I started my people cycling. What we had to do, we had troops on all the ships. As I say, we had 5,000 Marines. And in addition to that, on all the MSTS ships, we had these small detachments of 50 Marines. And these 50 Marines, under the command of a lieutenant, had the responsibility of taking care of, and on one ship, we had 5,000 refugees. 50 men were taking care of this. Young men, young Marines. They had one corpsman with them. There were some people that came in over the sides from the boats that didn't come in on the helicopters, that had not been searched, and we had a few firefights on a couple of the ships by these young Marines. They had to disarm the VC. So those people, along with the people, first, the final people that fought for the South Vietnamese, the people in the compound that did most of the planning to move the refugees. And they had to do a lot of this kind of clandestinely because the ambassador, even when I went in to meet the ambassador, he remarked to me, he said, "Don't stir the ashes too hard. I don't want people to know what's going on." So he was committed and got down to the last minute to try to stay in there. To his credit, he wanted to stay to help the Vietnamese. He felt very committed to the people of South Vietnam. So it was difficult from that standpoint. He caused us a lot of heartache, caused a lot of people a lot of heartache. But again, I've been told, and George, you probably can verify this, I've been told that his son had been killed in Vietnam. His son was an Army lieutenant and had been killed in Vietnam. So he had some personal attachment to South Vietnam. But once we got started on the evacuation, the first planes landed at Tan Son Nhut, the 53s. I put in a battalion of Marines into Tan Son Nhut to provide security. That morning, I had provided additional people into the embassy. I provided people into the embassy later on. We eventually wound up with about 180 Marines in the embassy, and they helped maintain order for the folks that are processing the people out. So, and there was a lot of, I don't think there was a lot of chaos in the embassy itself until the final minutes when they were doing the final part of trying to get out of there. Up to that time, it was a pretty orderly transition. The basic problem was trying to get people in through the gates, trying to keep the people coming over the walls, trying to come over the walls to get into the evacuation. And I have to say, I'm sure that some people were permitted to come over those walls by these young folks, and they'd see all those sad faces and crying and begging to get out. They probably were let in by sympathizers, Marine sympathizers that let them in. We still believe that there were some people that came in the back door also, because every time we asked for how many people that were to come out of the embassy, we continuously got 2,000 people. The ambassador kept saying, "You got 2,000 people." When he called me that afternoon at about 1600 in the afternoon, 4 o'clock, he said, "When are you going to start sending, I need some Marines." First he said, "I need some Marines." And I said, "What do you need Marines for?" And he said, "The people are coming over the walls." And I said, "When are you coming down here?" And he said, "I'm not going to come down here to the EAO. I'm going to stay here." So I had to start shuttling aircraft into the embassy at that time. And we shuttled them on a regular basis, particularly the CH-53s into the courtyard where we'd cut the tamarind tree down. That, again, appeared to be a fairly routine task, trying to get the people aboard until late at night. At Tan Son Nhut, we finished up in a little over 4.5 hours, the evacuation. I received a call at 10 o'clock, at 10:30 that night. We were now getting our Marines out, those 800 and some Marines. And the planes were very slow coming into the DAO at that time, the CH-53s. The ambassador called me on the phone, and he said, "What's happened to the airplanes?" And I said, "Why?" He said, "I haven't had an airplane in over a half an hour." So we had, within the control of the evacuation, we had a control aircraft from Utapao, and we had gunships, C-130 gunships. We had tactical aircraft. They flew approximately 200 sorties, the tactical aircraft, in case we needed them. And I tried to contact the control aircraft and ask them. I couldn't talk to the ship. I had to talk through the control aircraft. So I talked to them and I said, call the ship and call the control center on the ship, the Combat Information Center. What has happened to our helicopters? They couldn't get an answer. So I had one alternative, and that was to go find out myself. We had to get things going again. So I got on the next helicopter that was evacuating Marines out of the DAO, which was a 53, and I wound up on the Midway, the USS Midway, which is another story. If I had time, I'd like to tell you about the Midway. One of your compatriots that flew aboard with his family in a small observation aircraft. So there's a lot of heroic actions that day. But anyway, I wound up on the Midway. It took a little time to get routed over to the ship, over to the Blue Ridge, which was the control vessel where the admiral was, who had control of the fleet. And I went over to him, and I walked into the Combat Operations Center, and I was a little bit angry, as you probably can imagine. And I said, "What happened to my helicopters? Who stopped them?" And he said, "I did." And I said, "Why did you stop them?" He said, "Well, they've been in the air almost 12 hours now, and that's way beyond the safety requirements." And I said, "There's no safety involved here. We've got a job to do." And at the same time, he got a call from Sink Pack, Commander-in-Chief Pacific, from the admiral there, who was on his right hand was sitting General Lou Wilson, who in Marine terms is fondly called the Smiling Cobra. And Lou said, "My Marines don't get tired." So that helped, and the admiral said, "Okay, we'll get." And I had to have this okay because he was senior to me, but I was ready to take other steps if necessary. But the point is that we got him started again, and during this time, we now got a call from Washington. And Washington said, "How many more people are to be evacuated?" And we called the ambassador. The DAO was finished by now. And we called the ambassador, and he said 800 people. And so we very quickly calculated, and that turned out to be 19 to 20 sorties of 53s. So we told that to Washington. See, this is really control, getting it right from the top level down. And they said, limit your evacuation to 19 more sorties. So we had more people in there, really, than 800. And that's where you get the part of the story that everybody didn't get out. It was limited as to the number of helicopters we could send in. We were only allowed to send that amount in at the last moment. Well, the final egress from the embassy is another story. It was very tense at the last moments. The Marines that were in there used tear gas to hold off the crowds. Obviously, people were coming over the walls. They went inside the embassy and closed the doors as they went up to the rooftop. And they evacuated the 50 Marines well, they evacuated up to 180 up to that time, but they still had about 50 Marines. They got them out by CH-46s off the top. But the final group was a group of 11 Marines. And they were left in there because cycling aircraft and so on, we'd now been going on since noon the day before, and it's now the next morning at about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And so we were having little difficulty cycling the aircraft. We finally got into the embassy and got the last people off at 7:30 in the morning. The ambassador came out on order of a little sidelight, a little story that I'd like to interject here. It's kind of humorous. But anyway, the ambassador was ordered out by Washington, and Washington told us, get the ambassador on the next aircraft. And the ambassador hadn't wanted to come out up to that time. And he's a pretty crusty old guy, as George, you can attest to. And unfortunately, at that time, he was suffering from pneumonia, couldn't talk hardly, and was pretty out of sorts, I guess. And so they said, well, he may not come out. How are we going to get him out? The Admiral turned to me, Admiral Steele, and I said, well, Admiral, why don't we ask Washington, give me permission, and if he refuses to come out, I'll just put a Marine on either side of him, and we'll carry him out. So anyway, Jerry Berry, who was on the last aircraft that picked him up, we called, and I talked to Jerry personally. I said, when you get into the embassy, you personally go down and talk to the ambassador and tell him he's to be on your aircraft by order of Washington. Apparently the ambassador had already gotten that information. I don't know, but he did come aboard the aircraft. But we did finish it up at 7:30 that morning, but that wasn't the end of it. These young troops that were aboard these ships, and as I said, there were 15 detachments on these MSTS ships, and these young Marines had been handled these folks all the way back, some of them all the way back to Guam. And they delivered babies, they had firefights, and they had to feed those people, and they had planned by the way they fed them the days before. They cooked barrels of rice, and they had barrels of rice on these MSTS ships, and that's the way we fed them, rice and water. That's about all they had. So as to the air crews that evacuated, I just simply say to those of you that are familiar with aviation, there were over 100 DFCs awarded. There were 220 air medals awarded. Each one of those operations, if you can imagine, going into, there was about a 10-foot clearance on the rotors, on each side of the rotors, 10 to 15, I guess. George, is that about right? In the courtyard, for them to come down into the courtyard, into an enclosed structure, and lift out, and some of the helicopters went out. Those helicopters are designed for 35 combat Marines, and the helicopters had up to 70 people on it. So that was some pretty doggone awesome find, discounting the fact that they did receive fire, friendly and enemy fire, on the way in, and they were flying in very, very hazardous weather conditions, and they were flying long hauls in. It was from the fleet into the ship, into the embassy, and into the DAO was about 80 miles from where the fleet was. It was about 60 miles down to Vung Tau from Saigon. So it was about 80 miles, and they're stretching their fuel capabilities. We lost 2 aircraft, 2 helicopters in the process. One crashed out on the ship. Fortunately, he crashed while going over to refuel. No people, no refugees were injured in that, and the other helicopter simply flew into the water. Because and remember, they had no no navigation aids. We were bringing them in with strobe lights into the embassy and into the DAO, and again fire, and the enemy's right next door. So a good job was done by those folks, a great job, the people that I've talked to. Now, as to Mr. Tom here, one of his compatriots came out to the ship, and prior to when we actually started the evacuation, the Vietnamese Air Force was flying helicopters and aircraft out to the fleet trying to land on the ships. And I remember before we actually started the actual evacuation, I was down in the control center, combat operations center on the Blue Ridge, and this horrendous bang in the ship, and it was a Vietnamese helicopter that had flown right into the side of the ship. But they would fly out beside the ship and pitch up, and the pilots would bail out, would just jump out, and we'd pick them up. So, and the people, the boat people that came out, the people were coming out in boats. We've got 40,000 people off of boats. And these young crews, these young Marines were handling those 40,000 people. And then subsequently handled them on the way back to Guam and the Philippines. I started to tell you a story about Mr. Thom's compatriot. He flew with his family, his wife, and I believe 4 children at the time, in a small observation aircraft. The admiral that was on the Midway, the aircraft was orbiting, and he called and he said, "I'm going to land." And they said, "You can't land here. You can't get stopped." And he said, "I'm going to land. I've got my family aboard." So the admiral cranked up the carrier, got it underway, and got it up to speed, got the maximum wind over the deck, and the man landed his aircraft with his family. So there's a great humanitarian act that took place. So with that, there's a lot that it takes a long time to tell you about the planning. The planning had been going on. I'd been in higher headquarters at SINCPAC prior to my assignment out there, and I knew that we were planning the evacuation of Cambodia and Vietnam dating back to 1973 when we left, when the American troops pulled out. So there was a lot of work by a lot of good people, believe me, and though it was a very sad day for me because I had an attachment also to Vietnam. I'd been there. This was my 3rd time out there. So I felt a lot of remorse that we were letting the Vietnamese people down. But unfortunately, a lot of it happened. A lot of the reason it fell the way it did was the peace accords that permitted the North Vietnamese to remain in country. That's strictly my opinion, that they permitted the North Vietnamese to remain in country instead of policing and getting them out, and they were able to come down with their military units along with the VC and fight the South Vietnamese armed forces. So that contributed to the eventual fall of Vietnam, unfortunately. And it's an honor and a privilege to be here, Alan.
Thank you. Thank you, General Carey. Well, obviously, General Carey, your chopper crews and your Marines on the ground and all the people supporting this Marine Amphibious Brigade were responsible under your command to get the job done. They did it in an excellent fashion, obviously, but it took a very outstanding Marine General Officer, General Carey, to oversee the effort, and we compliment you, and we're delighted to have you as a resource in our community and as our guest today for this program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My honor.
Just a few final statistics on our war. There were an estimated 2.1 million people killed during the war in Vietnam. As we know, 58,169 were Americans. An estimated 3.65 million additional people were wounded. among whom there were 304,000 were our troops and our people. 153,000 of our Americans were categorized as seriously wounded, and that included 10,000 amputees. An estimated 444,000 North Vietnamese and 220,000 South Vietnamese military personnel and 587,000 civilians were killed. That kind of finishes up the historical context of our involvement there. We really need to formally close the forum, and I guess as y'all have been talking, I guess our employees have gone on back to work because they only were able to be here for an hour, and so. But the different people here will be available to. You all will stay and be available. We thank you very much. Be available to answer any other questions. If any other people have questions, they can come and use this mic here. Thank you very much. Yeah, pretty much. Yes, come on up here to the mic, please. Identify yourself, please. Ask a question.
Yes, my name is Robert Durham, and I just want the general to know that I was on the Blue Ridge when we was pushing off choppers on the side.
Oh, you were? Yeah, that's great.
What is your name again? Robert Durham. Robert Durham. Marine, Navy, Marines. Okay. I guess it's in your command, General.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we were right there with you. Only thing about being on the Blue Ridge, though, the first 2 days I was unconscious, man. I went in and went to bed, and it was about a day and a half later before I woke up.
Yeah. My name is Joseph Lashley. I was attached to the support battalion in Vietnam and Cameron Bay, Long Bay. And what General Carey said about the VCs and the North Vietnamese, I'm totally agree to that, because some nights I had to pull duty and I had to carry my weapon. The first thing they would say is, don't load. But I kept my weapon loaded and got caught by one of my sergeants. But I had to go to my company commander and express to him, I'm over here taking care of the U.S. interests. What I have to do, I'm going to do it.
The main interest was yourself.
Myself and my comrades. Yeah.
Okay.
General.
Do I have time for one more question or comment, either one? Okay, all you guys and gals that are still here, I want to thank you very much. It's been a great program for all of us, obviously very historic to have this first-hand information. We'll have it on video, and we'll get it edited and try to get it on Dallas Community Television and get it shown on that. And we want to thank all of you for being here as attendees and guests. Definitely want to thank our panelists for being here and telling us about this historic several weeks in the history of Vietnam. Thank you very much.